The phone call came exactly 24 hours before my late husband's will was scheduled to be read. I almost ignored it. The caller ID showed the name of his attorney, Richard Bennett. When I answered, his voice was unusually quiet. "Margaret, I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Alone." My stomach tightened. "Why?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then he said something that changed everything. "There's another will. A document your stepson doesn't know exists. And until we meet, tell absolutely no one where you're going." I didn't sleep that night, because suddenly nothing made sense. My name is Margaret Collins, and I was 56 years old when my world changed for the second time in 6 weeks. The first time was the day my husband, Thomas, died. The second was the day I realized his son had already decided what would happen after the will was read. Thomas and I had been married for 22 years. Together, we built a life filled with trust, routines, and quiet happiness. He also built one of the most respected real estate companies in our state. Everyone admired him, including his only son, Ryan. Or at least that's what I had always believed. 6 weeks after the funeral, Ryan acted less like a grieving son and more like a man waiting for a prize. Every conversation seemed to revolve around the company, the properties, and the future. He spoke confidently about upcoming changes, new leadership decisions, and long-term plans. The strange part was that the will hadn't even been read yet. Yet Ryan carried himself as if the outcome had already been decided. One afternoon, while we sat in the family home, he casually looked around the living room and smiled. "You'll probably want something smaller after everything is settled," he said. I stared at him. This house is a lot for one person. The comment stung more than I expected. Thomas had never given me any reason to believe I wouldn't be protected. Still, I said nothing. That evening, I sat alone with old photographs, missing my husband more than ever. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas's attorney, Richard Bennett. What he said next made my heart stop. "Margaret, we need to meet tomorrow morning. Alone." The next morning, I arrived at Richard Bennett's office 15 minutes early. The waiting room was empty. That alone felt unusual. Richard had handled Thomas's legal affairs for nearly 3 decades. He was organized, calm, and never seemed rattled by anything. Yet when his assistant escorted me into his office, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Richard stood beside his desk instead of behind it. His expression was tense. "Thank you for coming, Margaret," he said quietly. I sat down. "What's this about?" Instead of answering immediately, he opened a locked drawer and removed a large sealed envelope. My pulse quickened. Richard carefully placed it on the desk between us. This was discovered 3 days ago inside Thomas's private safety deposit box. I frowned. Another will? Not exactly. He slid the envelope closer. Thomas left specific instructions. This was only to be opened under certain circumstances. My confusion deepened. What circumstances? Richard exhaled slowly. If there were concerns regarding the execution of his estate. The room suddenly felt smaller. I don't understand. I didn't either at first. He removed several documents. The primary will still exists. Under that document, Ryan inherits most of Thomas's business interests. That wasn't surprising. Then Richard lowered his voice. But this envelope changes everything. I stared at him. How? He opened the folder and revealed a handwritten letter. The familiar signature at the bottom made my chest tighten. "Thomas. He specifically instructed me to give this to you first," Richard said. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. Then I read the very first sentence. "Margaret, if you're reading this, someone I trusted has betrayed me." I read the sentence 3 times before its meaning finally sank in. Someone I trusted has betrayed me. My hands shook as I continued reading. Thomas explained that about a year before his death, he had started noticing irregularities inside the company. Small discrepancies at first. Missing reports. Financial approvals he didn't remember signing. Investment decisions that seemed unusually rushed. At first, he blamed stress. Then the inconsistencies grew. According to the letter, Thomas quietly hired a private forensic accounting firm to review company records without informing anyone. Not even me. The investigators found something alarming. Money had been moving through a network of outside companies with no obvious connection to the business. The transactions were carefully disguised, spread across multiple accounts, and structured to avoid attention. Thomas wrote that he initially refused to believe what the evidence suggested, because the person connected to many of those transactions was Ryan. I lowered the letter and stared at Richard. This can't be right. Richard didn't respond. His silence spoke louder than words. I forced myself to keep reading. Thomas described months of private investigation. Every time he uncovered one suspicious transaction, another appeared. The deeper he looked, the more concerned he became. Then I reached a paragraph that made my chest tighten. Margaret, if you're reading this, I may not have had enough time to finish what I started. I swallowed hard. Attached behind the letter were dozens of documents. Bank records, transfer summaries, corporate reports, pages of evidence Thomas had gathered himself. Then I found the final attachment. Unlike the others, it carried an attorney's seal. It was a legal amendment dated 6 months before Thomas died. And according to the first paragraph, it would activate immediately if financial misconduct was ever proven. The following afternoon, the entire family gathered inside Richard Bennett's conference room. The atmosphere felt tense from the moment I arrived. Ryan sat at the head of the table wearing an expensive suit and a confident smile. He greeted relatives, discussed future business plans, and spoke as though the company already belonged to him. I remained quiet. Only Richard and I knew what was coming. When everyone settled into their seats, Richard began reading Thomas's will. The first section unfolded exactly as expected. Several charitable donations, specific gifts to family members, then the business assets. Ryan inherited controlling interest in the company. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. He leaned back comfortably. For a moment, it seemed as though the meeting was over. Then Richard closed the document and reached for another folder. The room immediately fell silent. "What is that?" Ryan asked. Richard adjusted his glasses. "There is an additional legally registered document left by Thomas Collins." The confidence vanished from Ryan's expression. Richard continued. "This document contains instructions, evidence, and a contingency amendment." Ryan's face paled. "What evidence?" Richard calmly distributed copies. I watched family members scan the pages. Confusion quickly turned into shock. The documents detailed suspicious transactions, unauthorized financial movements, and findings from an independent investigation commissioned by Thomas before his death. Ryan immediately stood. "This is ridiculous." No one answered. Richard then presented results from a recently completed forensic audit. The findings matched Thomas's concerns. Several transactions required further investigation. The room erupted with questions. Then Richard opened the final document, the legal amendment. Under its terms, Ryan's inheritance rights would be suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. For the first time all afternoon, Ryan looked genuinely afraid. And he suddenly understood that everything had changed. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, independent auditors confirmed that unauthorized financial transactions had occurred over several years. The evidence was clear, documented, and impossible to dismiss. Ryan spent months denying responsibility, but facts have a way of speaking for themselves. As the investigation continued, Thomas's contingency plan officially took effect. Ownership of the company was transferred into a protected trust exactly as outlined in the amendment. And, to my complete surprise, Thomas had named me as trustee. When Richard informed me, I was speechless. "Thomas trusted your judgment," he said. "More than anyone." For the first time since his death, I felt tears fill my eyes. Not because of the company, because even after he was gone, Thomas had found a way to protect what mattered. A few weeks later, Richard handed me one final letter, the last letter Thomas had ever written. I opened it alone. In it, he explained that success, money, and titles meant very little without integrity. He wrote that trust was the foundation of every family and every business, and once broken, it could destroy both. He thanked me for standing beside him through every challenge, every risk, and every victory. Most of all, he thanked me for being the person he could always count on. Over the following months, new leadership restored stability to the company. Employees kept their jobs. Clients stayed. The future remained secure. As for me, I finally understood what Thomas had truly left behind. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't property. It wasn't control. It was the truth. And in the end, that truth protected everything he had spent a lifetime building, including me.